Before the movie sets, for the body doubles and bad press, Steven Seagal was just an American martial artist living in Japan, unknown, intense, and married. It was the late 1970s, and Seagal had yet to kick down a single Hollywood door. He was training under old masters in Osaka and running a modest dojo with his first wife, Ayako Fujitani. She wasn't a starlet. She was better. A seventh dan black belt in Aikido, formidable, and deeply respected in Japan martial arts circles. She gave him not just credibility, but something more permanent: 2 children. That's how Steven Seagal's story as a father began. But what happened to it? What happened to the 7 children of Steven Seagal, each born into a different version of the same man? Martial artist, movie star, runaway husband, distant father, and public myth. Some were raised in Japan. Others grew up in California. One was born in Mongolia. A few followed in his footsteps. Most walked the other way. In 1975, while Steven was still teaching Aikido in Osaka and struggling to get the attention of American producers, his first child, Kentaro Seagal, was born. He entered the world not as the son of a celebrity, but as the heir to a martial legacy. That same year, Steven began networking with Hollywood contacts, flying back and forth between Tokyo and Los Angeles, pitching himself as a new kind of action figure: real training, real skills, no stunt double required. But while Seagal's ambition drifted west, his family remained east. In 1979, just before he would leave Japan for good, Miyako gave birth to their second child, Ayako. Her arrival came at a turning point. Steven was growing restless. He believed he was destined for something bigger. So he left Japan and his young family to chase a dream 5,000 miles away. Back in the States, he hustled behind the scenes. He taught martial arts to James Coburn, trained stuntmen, consulted on scripts. It was quiet, but it was movement. And then, in 1908, it finally happened. Above the Law hit theaters, and Seagal's era began. He wasn't just believable, he was dangerous, hard to kill, marked for death, out for justice, film after film. Year after year, the image of Steven Seagal grew sharper, colder, more iconic. But while he was breaking bones on screen, Kentaro was growing up in his mother's dojo. Under Miyako's eye, he earned his black belt and trained relentlessly. By the time his father was topping box offices, Kentaro was already becoming a serious martial artist in his own right. He later moved to the U.S., attending Brewster Academy in New Hampshire, and briefly enrolling at USC. But his path never really veered far from where it started. In 2008, he opened a branch of Tenshin Dojo in Los Angeles, not as a tribute to his father, but in honor of his mother's tradition. It was quiet, intentional his. He also dabbled in acting, a few indie films in the late 90s and early 2000s. Seamless, The Bleep Brothers, Death Trance, nothing headline-worthy. And that's how he preferred it. Kentaro never chased the spotlight. He inherited the skill, not the swagger. His relationship with Steven? Practically invisible. No interviews, no red carpets, no public praise. He lived just miles from the man who helped bring Aikido to America, but never needed to use his name to do it. Ayako, on the other hand, chose creativity over combat. While Kentaro stayed in the dojo, Ayako found herself drawn to stories, characters, and the strange poetry of cinema. She was raised on Japanese horror films and art house scripts, shaped by her mother's quiet wisdom and her father's distant shadow. She began modeling in her teens, then acting, appearing in the cult Gamera monster series before breaking out in 2008's Tokyo, where she starred in Michel Gondry's surreal segment Interior Design. Ayako never bragged about who her father was. She didn't need to. Her work spoke for itself, subtle, aching, cinematic. She wrote essays, explored identity, created her own lane. In 1998, she briefly appeared alongside her father in The Patriot, playing his secretary. It was their one-on-screen overlap, and even then, it felt like 2 actors from 2 different universes sharing the frame by accident. In interviews, she kept things cool. "We're good to each other," she told the LA Times. "We don't have any weird things going on between us. We're chill." It wasn't glowing, but it wasn't bitter either. Just chill through Kentaro and Ayako. You glimpse the 2 halves of Seagal's early legacy, the tradition he left behind, and the voices he never quite listened to. They weren't raised in fame, they weren't raised in rage, they were raised in the absence of both, and somehow turned out the most grounded of them all. No headlines, no scandals, just two adults living beyond the frame of their fathers. Myth, and maybe, just maybe, that's where the real story begins. By the time Under Siege hit theaters in 1992, Steven Seagal wasn't just an action star. He was an icon, a black belt with box office pull, a man whose silence spoke louder than 1,000 one-liners. He had already become the face of no-nonsense justice. Sleek ponytail, sharp gaze, and a reputation for doing things his own way. But behind the scenes, his personal life was unraveling at the same speed as his rise to stardom. He had left behind his family in Japan, and now he was building a new one in California with actress and model Kelly LeBrock. Their relationship had started in secrecy, an affair, while Seagal was still married, and it ended up becoming one of Hollywood's most talked about couplings. Kelly was a household name herself, a former fashion icon who had turned heads in The Woman in Red and Weird Science together. They were tabloid gold. But inside their Malibu home, the fairy tale was complicated. In May of 1987, right between the releases of Above the Law and Hard to Kill, their daughter, Annaliza Seagal, was born. Seagal was riding the wave of stardom, constantly flying from film sets to premieres. He was the face of every magazine rack, and Annaliza, she was barely mentioned. While Steven fought bad guys on screen, Kelly raised their daughter in near isolation. Annaliza's childhood was marked not by red carpets, but by the silence of a sprawling home in Santa Barbara. As her father racked up hits like Marked for Death and Out for Justice, she remained tucked away from the cameras. Unlike her older half-siblings who had at least grown up near the dojo or with some cultural reference to their father's legacy, Annaliza grew up in the shadow of absence. Her father was everywhere except home. Even after Steven married Kelly in 1987, the household was anything but stable. As his star rose, so did the tension in their relationship. In 1990, during the same year as Seagal starred in Marked for Death, their second child, Dominic Seagal, was born. He arrived just as his father was becoming synonymous with American masculinity, stoic, violent, invincible. But off-screen, the image cracked. By the early 1990s, Steven was more than an actor. He was directing, On Deadly Ground, 1994, fighting studio execs, and even getting invited to Kremlin dinners. But he wasn't fathering in the conventional sense. Dominic, like Annaliza, was raised mostly by Kelly. The couple's marriage fell apart in 1994, the same year. Steven starred in Under Siege 2, Dark Territory, and was declared too big to fail, but he failed at home. Kelly took all three children and moved to Santa Barbara permanently. Dominic and Annaliza would grow up in a quiet corner of California, where the only signs of celebrity were the magazines their father appeared in and the occasional late-night rerun of his movies. Dominic attended the Dunn School, a small private school known for fostering creativity over competition. Later, he enrolled in film studies at Santa Barbara City College, not because of his father, but perhaps in spite of him. He preferred storytelling from behind the camera. No martial arts, no press, no drama, just editing, scripts, and anonymity. But while Annaliza and Dominic recoiled from the spotlight, one sibling leaned in. Born in 1990, right as Steven's reputation began to tilt from untouchable to unpredictable, Arissa LeBrock arrived into a family mid-collapse. Her earliest years were shaped by chaos, lawsuits, divorce, and headlines. But unlike her brother and sister, Arissa never resented the limelight. She was drawn to it. As a child, Arissa idolized her mother. She watched Kelly transform for photo shoots, memorized the rituals of hair and makeup, and began posing before she could read. Modeling wasn't a career idea, it was a legacy. But Arissa didn't want to be a copy of Kelly. She wanted to be more stronger, louder herself. By her teens, Arissa was pursuing a modeling career of her own. But it wasn't easy. She wasn't the stereotypical size zero model. She was curvy, powerful, unapologetic. In an industry that punished anything outside the narrow ideal, Arissa carved space for herself and others. She embraced body positivity before it became a movement. And when people whispered about her last name, she didn't flinch. In 2017, Arissa and Kelly appeared together in Growing Up Supermodel, a Lifetime reality series that followed the children of famous parents. The show gave viewers a glimpse into their complicated, loving bond. Arissa's fierce independence and Kelly's lingering trauma. For the first time, the public saw Arissa not as Seagal's daughter, but as a woman making her own name in an industry that had often tried to erase women like her. Then, in 2019, Arissa made a pivot. No one saw coming. She started training as a professional wrestler. Under the name Ayako LeBrock, she began preparing for the WWE. Her Instagram filled with clips of takedowns, gym sessions, and bruises. She trained at Rhodes Wrestling Academy under the legendary Dustin Rhodes. Despite an early injury, she kept pushing. She wasn't here for fame, she was here to fight. Unlike her siblings, Arissa didn't shy away from her father. She posted a Father's Day tribute in 2023, writing, "Even though you're far away, I hope you know I'm thinking of you." In those few words lived a complicated story: distance, yes, but not bitterness. Arissa had built her identity outside of Steven Seagal's fame, but she hadn't abandoned the connection. By the time Steven's movies were going straight to DVD and his public image leaned more toward parody than prestige, Arissa was in the gym, sweating through her own script. She had taken pieces from both her parents, the strength, the resilience, the beauty, and shaped them into something the tabloids could never define. 3 children, 3 different outcomes. Annaliza, invisible by choice, Dominic, quietly creative, and Arissa, a force of nature, all raised in the flickering shadow of their fathers. Fame, all born during the height of his career, and yet none of them chose to follow his path directly. They lived not in the legacy of Steven Seagal, but in its orbit, sometimes pulled in, sometimes resisting, but always aware that their last name came with stories they didn't ask to carry. As the Hollywood spotlight dimmed on Steven Seagal's career, his personal life didn't slow down. By the mid to late 1990s, Seagal had gone from A-list action hero to a figure hovering at the edge of mainstream cinema. Still prolific, still recognizable, but increasingly distant from the red carpet world he once ruled. His personal relationships followed a similar pattern: complicated, fractured, and quietly unfolding away from cameras. And then, from that silence, came 2 more children, each entering at different stages of Seagal's evolving life, each raised with radically different versions of who their father was. On September 4th, 1996, Seagal welcomed his 6th child, Savannah Seagal. Her mother, Arissa Wolf, was Steven's former nanny and partner during a time when his marriage to Kelly LeBrock had already collapsed. Their relationship never reached the red carpet, never grabbed headlines. It wasn't the tabloid scandal some expected. It was quieter, perhaps messier, and never fully explained to the public. But from it came a daughter. Savannah was born as Seagal's name was beginning to slip from Hollywood's list. The Glimmer Man had just premiered, and critics were already noting the fading sharpness of his once dominant screen presence. Box office appeal was declining, but behind the curtain, Savannah had arrived into a world still branded by her father's fame, even if it wasn't quite the spotlight it once had been. Unlike her older siblings, Savannah's life was largely undocumented. No reality shows, no interviews, no social media campaigns. She wasn't raised in martial arts dojos or cast photo shoots. Instead, she spent her formative years away from Los Angeles entirely. She eventually attended Rhodes College in Memphis, Tennessee, a small liberal arts school known for privacy and academic rigor, not celebrity lineage. For Savannah, that seemed like a deliberate choice. Classmates remembered her as introspective, driven, and careful. She rarely talked about her father. In fact, most students had no idea she was connected to Steven Seagal at all. It wasn't until years later, after graduation, after her social profiles quietly hinted at lineage, that the dots were connected. And by then, it didn't really matter. Savannah had already built a life on her terms. If Savannah represented Seagal's fading years in American cinema, then Kunzang Seagal represented something entirely different. A reboot, born in September 2009 to Steven's current wife, Erdenatuya Batsuk, Kunzang was the son who arrived long after the box office glory had passed. El, a Mongolian-born professional dancer, met Seagal during one of his visits to Asia and soon became his partner in both life and business. She was calm, poised, and intensely private. In many ways, she seemed like the stabilizing force Steven hadn't had before. Their marriage marked a new chapter less about movies, more about image control, diplomacy, and personal legacy. And Kunzang was at the center of it. From the beginning, Steven spoke openly about his youngest son in a way he never had with the others on his short-lived reality series. Steven Seagal, lawman, audiences were introduced to a different version of the man known, who quoted Zen proverbs, patted children's heads, and talked proudly about Kunzang's future. Kunzang is the latest addition, he said on the show. He's the light of my life. He's getting big and strong. It was a rare vulnerability captured on camera for a man who had built his legacy on stoicism and fists. But even in those moments, the line between public performance and private truth was blurry. Was Steven finally settling into fatherhood, or simply reshaping his image for a quieter audience? Kunzang's early years were filled with travel and discretion. Photos surfaced occasionally: family hikes, birthday cakes, glimpses of Buddhist ceremonies, but there was no Hollywood glamour in sight. Elle and Steven raised him with intention, with distance, and with care. The boy wasn't just the youngest Seagal. He was the only one being raised directly under Steven's daily roof. The only one growing up not with stories about his father, but with the man himself. That made all the difference. Unlike Kentaro, who inherited discipline without attention, or Dominic, who inherited silence without direction, Kunzang was being raised in real time by a father finally old enough, calm enough, and perhaps regretful enough to try again. Of course, the Seagal brand remained tangled. By the time Kunzang turned 10, his father had embraced Russian citizenship, appeared next to Vladimir Putin, and become a lightning rod for political controversy. He was no longer just an action star. He had become something else. Part martial artist, part mystic, part internet curiosity. It's unclear how much of that Kunzang absorbed. What is clear, however, is that his mother worked hard to shield him from the fallout. As of today, Kunzang remains almost entirely out of the public eye. His social media presence is non-existent. Interviews are unheard of, but occasional photos still surface, shared sparingly by Steven himself. In one, Kunzang practices martial arts with his father in a sunlit courtyard. In another, he's seated next to Elle at a cultural event in Mongolia, calm and attentive. The boy doesn't smile much in pictures, he doesn't pose. But maybe that's the point. Steven Seagal's 7 children were born into 7 different versions of the same man: a martial artist, a movie star, a husband, a deserter, a diplomat, a father, sometimes a myth, always. Some children never knew the fame directly, some never escaped it, some tried to earn his love, some chose to live without it, but together they form a mosaic of lives shaped by fame, by silence, by legacy. Kentaro with the discipline, Ayako with the creativity, Annaliza with the quiet, Dominic with the questions, Arissa with the fight, Savannah with the privacy, and Kunzang perhaps with the second chance. They are not his sequels, they are his consequences, and they are writing their own scripts. If you enjoyed this video and want more deep dives into the lives of famous families, please consider subscribing. Your support helps us bring these stories to light. Thanks for watching.